This is the Course of Action podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, and your favorite platform worldwide. You can also stream new episodes on the Reeves Across America radio network every Monday at noon Eastern. Reeves Across America's mission is to remember the fallen, honor those who serve, and teach future generations the value of freedom. All right, guys, I'm back here. New York Times bestseller Jerome Preisler. Jerome has been on the show before, and we're welcoming him back. Jerome, how are you?
I'm fine, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm good,
Long time
thank you.
see.
I know, right? Yeah, we were just chatting, of course, about pizza. We've talked about pizza before, and I got me a New York slice when I was at Thriller Fest last year, and
Well, it was actually, we had a debate, or I, as a native New Yorker, was dissuading you of the notion that it was actually an authentic raised pizza because of the
Yes.
raised pizza wars in New York.
Yeah, I right down the street from, was it the Sheraton or
From
the
the
Hilton?
hotel. Yeah,
From the
there was
hotel.
a quote unquote raised pizza.
When I
But
can't
see, there's a whole
remember.
battle because there are Rays. After this, at some point, the original Ray, if he ever existed, passed away. Now he himself may be a rumor. But assuming that he really lived, that there were all these offshoots. There were these cousins and brothers, and they all claimed to be heirs to the Great Ray's Pizza chain. So Ray's pizzerias sprang up all around New York until everybody was just Ray's Pizza. Like if I opened a pizzeria, I'd be Ray's too. You
Mhm.
just want to sort of be part of the whole. It's like it's a thing.
Right, and we don't know if though, or are we sure? Refresh my memory that the one that I went to down the block was
We
not.
don't
It's not an
know.
original one.
We would need a real expert in Ray's
Okay.
Pizza. We'd have to like get look online and see if there's a guy we can hire at a few $100 an hour who
Wow, that's
who can
serious.
who can give us the provenance of Ray's pizzas.
Yeah, and tell us which one's the right one. No,
Yeah.
I ate it, and then it was like, oh man, it's
Or
pretty
we could
good.
just, if it's good, if it's pizza, hey, what the hell? It's good. It's Ray's to me.
Yeah, I think I remember you telling me, and you're like, it might not have been an authentic one. It might have, and you told me the whole story and the backstory behind it. I was like, I feel like I've kind of been robbed.
Burst your bubble.
No, it's good to have you on, my friend. Thanks for doing this again. I want to talk about your book, First to Jump, which you have right there behind you. I have a copy.
Yeah.
Right here, very cool book, How the Band of Brothers was aided by the brave paratroopers of Pathfinders Company. Very interesting. I love the quote that you have on the back. It says, when you land in Normandy, you will only have one friend, God. That's by General Jim Gavin to the Pathfinders of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions before D-Day in June of 44. So what kind of stoked you to write a historical book like this? Where did kind of the motivation and inspiration come from?
Well, I'm a big. I read a lot of World War II history, and always have. And I think in The Longest Day, which is one of my favorite World War II narrative histories, there was, which I'd read a long time ago and since reread a few times. There was mention of the Pathfinders, but it was like a page, and so I wondered about them because they, just to kind of fill people in, there were the Pathfinders were founded. They were a volunteer unit, and they were considered, especially in Normandy, to be going on a suicide mission. So the people who were encouraged to volunteer were the incorrigibles, people who, would have been going to the brig otherwise, or who just were kind of chronic, had behavior problems, and so there were a total of, I believe it was 340 or 360 of them trained for Normandy, and they were, someone referred to them as the tip of the spear. The tip of the spear, of course, being the airborne forces that jumped the night before the invasion, the broader invasion, and The Pathfinders took off about an hour before the rest of the airborne troops, of the 101st and 82nd. And they were, it was, they, I think there were, don't quote me on this, it's been a while since I wrote the book, but there was something like 13 planes. Um, there was most, I think the sticks were 8 men, so I can do the math. But at any rate, their job was to jump first and to lay out the markers that the successive waves of paratroopers would use
Hmm.
to establish their drop zones. And as well, anybody who's studied Normandy, the history of the invasion knows, the weather that night was awful. In fact, Eisenhower agonized over whether or not to call it off until very close to the last minute. And these planes were flying into gigantic stacks of clouds that gave them no visibility. It's important, I think, for us in modern times to understand that they had no, obviously, no satellite recon.
Yeah,
They were,
totally different back in 44 than what we have
yeah, they,
today, aviation wise.
yeah, they were going off very crude photo recon, and it was enemy territory. So how many of our planes had been able to actually do the surveillance flights? So they really didn't necessarily even have up to date. In fact, they didn't have up to date information. But anyway, these guys were jumping with since they were the first, there was no cover. I don't know. Do you know much about the C-47s and which were the troop carriers that brought them there?
I've heard of them. You know, being in the Air Force, we've heard some history about different airframes. I was not in aviation myself, but I did. Yeah, the C-47s. What is it? C-141s. A bunch of other aircraft. But yeah,
The C-47s were very thin, thin-skinned, and they had to be lightweight because they were carrying troops and cargo, and also they were unarmed. So they didn't have any means of defending themselves. It's another story, but I would like to someday do a book about the C-47 pilots whose acts of heroism, some of them of which I described in the book, were just incredible. These
yeah, that
guys,
would be cool.
they were coming in low against anti-aircraft fire without any cover, any way to defend themselves. In many cases, dropping cargo and paratroopers while the aircraft were on fire and going down. But anyway, getting back to the Pathfinders, their job was to jump and lay out the landing zones. And the landing zones, just to give it a really brief kind of description, were to be made up of these luminous panels that would be laid out on the ground in the shape of a T. The top horizontal crossbar of the T marked the spot where the men were to jump. Or that was actually the target, and the long vertical bar of the T was almost like a runway, and in that's how the planes would orient themselves. However, the Germans were quickly became aware that they were under attack and began uh, hitting them with ack and so as a result of both the ground fire and the weather, these planes were widely scattered. They couldn't see anything, and the men had to jump wherever they could, all throughout, uh, just past the beachheads. And then they had to orient themselves by using their compasses or stars that really weren't visible and find they was the units were scattered. So what
Yeah,
they did was they started making up they just kind of made up ad hoc units as they went along, looking for each other, looking for Americans while the Germans were out looking for them, and somehow or other managed to set up their T. They only had 15 minutes to set up the T's, and not all of them were able to, and that's why there was a lot of chaos with the original with the later paratrooper jumps. But that's what these guys were doing, and it was a pretty damn heroic and um, uh, vital component of the invasion.
I have kind of a love for World War II as well because my grandfather served in World War II in the China, India, Burma area, and I really want to. One of these days, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to dive in and research more of the Burma Road and that area over there because I know what he did. He was a weather specialist in the Army Air Corps before it became the Air Force and Special Operations Weathers, which is what his unit has evolved into today. I've been able to trace his lineage from his unit all the way to modern day times. And I think it's the third Special Weather Squadron or something like that here in Air Force today. And I really want to sit down and look at more of that area of the
Yeah, you should
war
do
and
that.
kind of dive into probably not going to find anything specific that my grandfather did, but if I can find something related to his unit or the area that
Right.
he was in, I really want to dig into that. And I don't know if I necessarily want to write about it, but I definitely want to to research it and
Family history and
yeah,
American history. Yeah.
yeah, and just
Yeah.
kind of get a little bit more of an understanding of it. I have a lot of his old military stuff, his uniform and his ribbon rack, and I've collected a couple little things over the years. And then my father-in-law gave me an old rifle from one of the wars and an old flare gun. I mean, just a huge, massive flare gun. I mean, the barrel's got to be, it looks like you could shove a bratwurst down it without any problems. I mean, and it's huge. It's made of iron. I mean, it's heavier than heck. Stuff like that's just cool to me to trace the lineage
Definitely.
back on and
Yeah.
kind of it also puts it into perspective today. Like when we complain about the little things, it's like, well, back then they were carrying a almost a 20-pound flare gun in a leather holster hanging off of their hip because they had to. And they were
Yeah.
walking through the muck, and there's no reason to complain today. It was way, way harder back then. Like, it puts it in perspective a little.
Puts a lot in perspective. I was knowing we'd be talking about First to Jump, but even almost unrelated to it. It's sort of the couple of things sometimes just sort of come together. I had gotten an email from a reader of one of my Net Force books,
Hmm.
and I really don't. I try to get not to get into politics too much, and um, uh, the guy was okay, but he said he there was wrote something about I don't see how any red-blooded American can believe in such and such and such and such, and I thought about that because I was going to answer him, and one of the things I wrote back to the guy is, if you go back to World War II and you go back to not just Normandy, obviously, but all of the many, many thousands of men and women who were killed, both soldiers, civilians. I mean, then you're getting obviously untold numbers. But
Mm-hmm.
let's get back to to our soldiers. They all bled red, and we don't know whether they were Democrats or Republicans or whatever else, or neither. And in fact, in those days, our society wasn't as divided and polarized as it is now. People, I think, these soldiers who were, the infantry soldiers who were 18, 19 years old, they just were worried about having to leave their girlfriends and their wives and their kids and their parents and their families and their homes and their jobs and
Yes.
everything else. And I think that they weren't looking at the politics of the thing. There was a united country against an enemy that everybody recognized as being a threat to us and the entire world. And again, um, when those men um, when those men stormed the beaches of Normandy in an attack that and sustaining losses that are almost unfathomable to us now, They weren't worried about each other's, whether they voted for FDR or not.
Right.
And I think that I started thinking about that a lot, and periodically think about that because there was this cohesion. And I'm not saying, I mean, I recognize that, you know, times change, and there's the internet, and I understand all the reasons, or at least many of the reasons that our society is so fragmented. But nevertheless, even that phrase, our society, is what we are trying to preserve. And so I think when you look back at something like World War II, and when I think back about writing a book like First to Jump, that really jumps out at me. I use a lot of, I try to use a lot of letters and accounts from family members, and so it's not just that I'm basing what I'm writing on official accounts. In fact, I go out of my way to get as many anecdotes as I can and compare them to the actual
Yeah.
after action reports and all that. And it's really something when you have these guys who volunteered because they knew, and they were from all over the country, and they were from places, they were from urban areas, they were from rural areas, they were from, places where you didn't regularly get a lot of news, but they understood that there was something that they had to fight for, and were very proud of what they were doing.
Yes.
And I think it's kind of just to use your words, it helps to. I think the more we know about that, and the more we at least try to give it some thought, it helps put our lives and our period of time into some kind of perspective.
Yes.
So
Sure
that's
does.
always been, yeah, um, that's a big deal for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think some people, I've heard this from other authors too, where they've gotten feedback from fans who have said things like that would never happen or blah blah blah. I think people tend to forget that it's fiction and that it's of the imagination. It's not fact. It's not
Right.
but and I
It,
think
it's a work of imagination.
yeah, and but as a group of people, us authors who are writing fiction and the authors who are trying to write fiction and break into the genre, we've almost created a problem to our own fault because we've done such a good job of making fiction based off of fact. So
Right.
when you read a fiction book, like you read a Brad Thor book, you read a Net Force book, there's so many details in there that you don't know. And that's kind of the point, is to read it and be entertained and not know what is fact and what is fiction. You know it's fiction, but you don't know what all inside of it is. That's the entertainment value of it.
And
And
then
people get so
there was
passionate, though.
there was a scene in this a long sequence in Attack Protocol, which is the second Net Force book, and it takes place in the back on these back roads of Transylvania, and two of my heroes, Mike Carmody and Kali Alcazar, are on motorcycles, and they're chasing down a guy in this souped up sports car who's made his way, who's escaping from the lair, the bad guy's lair, their headquarters, which is a converted old castle. And it's a snowy night, and the roads have a thin sheet of ice of snow on them. Not really ice yet, but snow. And I have I have this great motorcycle action, if I must say so myself. I mean, I just really just went wild with it. And I know that sometimes when you're writing a scene like that, some of it's a bit of a stretch, but we are talking about heroic figures. We're talking about, they're not superhuman, but they certainly are peak human in terms of their physical abilities. And we also are talking about something that is entertainment and that's action. Uh, it's an action adventure novel. And, so are there some elements of the chase that you think, well, wow, this guy's got to be really good. Yeah, but he is really good. He's better
Yeah.
than any of us. That's why he's a hero. That's why the book. That's why you're not the hero of the book, and I'm not the hero of the book, because he beats us all. You know.
Yeah.
But but what's was funny about that is I got a review, and the guy said, I really liked the book, and blah blah blah, he was one of these guys who like gives you a 2-star, but I just couldn't buy. I live in Canada, and I'm telling you, uh, um, I couldn't do that with this and that with a motorcycle on a slick road. And it's like, yeah, but you're not the star of my book.
Yeah. You live in Canada. Like you live
And this is
the
Canada, man.
yeah, like did it even take place there? Like,
No, it
geez,
didn't.
like when
It didn't.
people leave a 1 or 2 star review because the book came damaged from Amazon. What? It's not the
I
author's
know. Yeah,
fault.
I've gotten my share of those as well.
Like, review Amazon. Send an email
Yeah,
to Amazon and complain to them. Don't do that to the author. I mean, they are acting like the author's standing there on the packaging line at the Amazon distribution facility, putting it in the box themselves.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, if that was the case, then fine. They deserved a 1 or 2 star review, but that's not happening. So come on.
I I've seen I had a friend of mine had what is it called? Ragged edges, decal edges, I guess. When a book's printed with ragged edge paper,
Hmm.
and that actually is like that's a dream of mine. No one's ever published one of my books with ragged edges. I like the ragged edge look. It gives it kind of a old fashioned
Hmm.
look. So I happen to like that. And usually it costs a bit more. And a friend of mine had one of his books published like that, and somebody gave it a 1-star review saying my book came with all the edges were all ragged. I'm like,
That's
you
probably
just
why it
can't
doesn't happen
win.
very often anymore. They're trying to
Yeah,
avoid
right.
that. Well, speaking of books, let's talk about what you have going on right now. What are you working on right now? Are there any big releases going to come up soon? What's going on
Not
in Jerome's
soon.
world?
I actually there's a kind of there's a pause in NetForce due to various business readings, which reasons, not readings. But that actually was not the worst thing for me. So I took the time to write a very lengthy novel proposal that's out there right now, and that's it's not a World War II thriller, but it's an espionage novel set during World War II, actually in the United States. So that's out there right now, and I'm about to begin work on a second proposal, which is a more of a contemporary thriller, also a standalone book, and I kind of like for the first time in I don't know how many years not being under an intense deadline. It's given me an opportunity to sort of regain my bearings and get a little mentally and physically healthier. Um, I, 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 I spent so many decades just really just like writing nonstop and no holidays, no birthdays, no anything.
Yeah,
So
because
the
you've
last
published a bunch of books. You've like go a set. Well, I think it
yeah
was like
yeah I mean
70 something
I'm sorry,
books when we talked.
40 something I
40 something.
think,
Yeah,
but
sorry.
I mean
It's a lot of books.
it's a lot of books and I'm certainly not complaining about that. I mean that's
Oh
a
yeah,
blessing,
no. Yeah.
but it takes its toll, and when it's all being done on written on most of being written on deadline. So the last few months actually have given me an opportunity to kind of regroup and look at some projects that, like the first one I was telling you about, the World War II era project, was something that had been germinating in my mind for years, and then I finally was able to sit down and put to paper. So um, that's what I've been working on in terms of writing. And you and I discussed that I've also really unexpectedly was asked to edit, be the editor at large for a very long standing entertainment
Yeah, let's talk about that a little.
movie. Yeah, it actually came about at the tail end of a business conversation about NetForce, because the person involved has his hand in a lot of things, including NetForce. So we were talking about some stuff, and at the end of it, he said, "Oh, by the way, I have this website, and I did, and it's the oldest NetForce. I'm NetForce crazy, but it's the oldest website of its type, I think, in the country, and now they've proliferated. But this has been around since the '90s, and he wanted it up. He wanted it updated, revamped, whatever word you want. And he said, I like the way you write, so maybe you can apply that to the editorial side of things and help me find good writers, and really um, upgrade and revamp and expand the content of the site." So I always say yeah to anything. I mean, it's like
Work is work, right?
work is work, and it's like you never know you just never know when it's going to come around
But
again.
you know what?
So
That's so true, and you never know what an opportunity is going to do for you.
you never
So,
do.
I think
Yeah,
you do have to kind of pick and protect your brand a little bit as an individual. But I think as long as you're falling within your wheelhouse, and and for like you're an author in multiple genres, so it makes sense to have a very broad, line of work. So I do agree. I think sometimes you have to say yes to things because you just don't know what the payout's going to be, but it could be
yeah,
huge. And I know that's happened to me several times. Like just having this podcast and having people on, I've gotten to know people who have gotten to know people, and then now I'm getting the emails from publishers and from publicists and saying, "Hey, do you got
yeah,
time for my guy? You got time for my
exactly.
brand new author? I'm sending you a book. What can you do for us?" And I'm like, "Oh my god, can't believe this
Yeah.
is going on right now." But like, it took me saying yes to things and getting to know things and opportunity.
Yeah, precisely. I one of my besides writing, one of my big interests has always been music, and I'm something of an amateur musician, and
And
I
the accordion, right?
lately accordion. I mean, I used to really play keyboards. I was like, rock, organ and keyboards and
Really?
honky tonk and all that stuff, and I found that I started really liking kind of folk Irish. I don't know if you've ever heard the Pogues, but the Irish punk band, and I really like their accordion stuff. I started listening to a lot of cumbia Latin music, which makes great use of accordion, and I just got into it. So I got myself an accordion during the pandemic, and
Really?
just thought it good. Everybody was doing something, so I started
But
teaching
yeah,
myself
that
accordion.
is true. Like I tried to get when the pandemic kicked off, I tried to buy some like weights for like a home gym to like build a little bit of a home gym to try to work out some. You couldn't find them. You couldn't find weights
Yeah,
in the
exactly
store. Like
right.
it was like
Yeah.
everybody was
Well,
doing
even
something.
there was a big accordion boom then too,
Was
and
it
everything.
really?
Yeah, everybody was getting. But I actually play like about an hour every day now,
Really?
and yeah, and but anyway, so to get back to what you were saying about the website, um, I started seeing if some of the musicians that I've been listening to over the years would be interested in being interviewed for the site, or promoting their new material, or just having articles written about them. And a lot of the people I like nobody else likes, or very they're usually kind of very they've got strong cult followings, but they're not they're not the bands that you're going to see playing at at stadiums. They're not stadium rock acts for the most part. And a lot of these, so I started doing a few articles, which is great because it's like I feel as though I'm popularizing people who really could use a little extra pop and get some more exposure. And there was one particular. I really am into. There's this whole music scene in Tucson, Arizona that I could go on forever about, but I won't right now. However, I wanted to do a story about this one particular musician there, and I emailed him and didn't hear from him for weeks, and then just thought I wasn't going to hear from him at all. And after about 5, 6, 7 weeks, I get an email from the guy. He says, "Why don't you give me a call?" We start talking, and I realized after talking to him for a while that he really didn't want to have an article done about him, unless he goes. After a while, it was like, "Well, unless you do it, Jerome," which may yet happen. But he and I have become friends,
Nice.
and and that would never have happened but for this gig. And so there's a lot of stuff on a personal and professional level that's really rewarding. And you hit it right on the head, is that you just don't know what opportunities open up for you, what doors open up.
You don't.
Um, I would always, and it's the same in writing. I mean, if if anybody's ever offered me any kind of writing job, I've always said yes. I never would. I mean, it's funny because I do work with a lot of younger writers now on the website, and I try to find them in different ways, and I'll get these people who are like really, either they ghost me, yeah, oh, yeah, I'm really interested, and I never hear from them again, or they've got 50 questions, and I thoroughly understand why you want to ask some questions, but I was always like, yeah, and then I would ask the questions. I was like, I'll do it.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
exactly.
really think, and when you're a writer, you need to uh, really understand that you cannot let opportunities pass you by. Um,
And
and
especially not today's world where the
no,
publishing industry and the media industry is kind of almost rewriting itself every 5 seconds. I mean,
yeah,
the
yeah,
new content is constantly being pushed. I mean, I was talking to someone today and we were talking books and we were just talking about how the rules have changed to get published. And like if Clancy tried to publish The Hunt for Red October or any of his other first couple of books, like even Rainbow Six, um, huge, thick books, 700, 800
yeah,
page
yeah,
books, it'd be dead on arrival. Like you couldn't
absolutely.
publish that today because you can't have chapters that are 40 pages long. You can't have an 800 page book that costs 50 something dollars to print and to resell. Like the name of the game today is not that. Attention spans are shorter. They're worried about audience retention. You got to keep them turning to pages. And now if like the Kindle rules where you get paid by the page, so it's even more important to retain the reader because if they stop on page 50 of a 350 page book, nobody's getting paid for those 300 pages that they developed. And like the rules have changed so much. And then, of course, our society has too. We have streaming and all kinds of, the access to information and entertainment is so broad now. Whereas, even back in just the 90s, it wasn't like that. We were still buying cassette tapes and CDs until the turn of the century, and then things started to go digital a little bit more. So it's such a change now that the rules have changed on how you do things. You have to jump on opportunity when it shows up, or if it passes you by, you can't let it go past you. You got to grab a hold of that train and jump on because that could have been your shot.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that like a lot of what you're saying is really on point because I've been through a lot of these cycles, these kind of peaks and valleys in the publishing business. And I remember when sales dipped and people and editors and publishers were saying, well, it's because of the advent of the video game. Well, maybe a little bit, but not really. I mean, maybe for a while, but
Mm-hmm.
it was a bounce back, and then it was uh, uh, the change, the transition from what they saw as being at that time being a complete transition from paper and ink books to digital to ebooks. And of course, that never really happened. I mean, ebooks have a share of the market, but ebooks aren't didn't take over from physical books.
Hmm.
However, so you've had, and then it's well, this kind of book is I remember when the Da Vinci Code was big and everybody was saying you got to write a book like the Da Vinci Code, but you're always behind the curve anyway. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous if you try to chase it, if you try to chase the market. So by the time you've written your Da Vinci Code novel or even your Da Vinci Code proposal, you're going to turn it into well, we've got too many to an editor, and we've got too many Da Vinci Code books, so they're not selling
Yeah.
anymore.
That was yesterday.
So yeah, but what you're saying is really true in that now there's this kind of combination of things, and it's ever changing. It changes. It's just fluid, and so it's not as if there's one thing that changes the market, but there are all kinds of factors that are moving pieces, and so it's very, very difficult to get a handle on what the market is, or even if the term the market really has that much relevance, because I don't know that there's a particular market in terms of uh, what's selling by type or genre. There are brands, there that sell just like anything else, and there are books that just take off. And I think half the time, if not more, when they take off, um, it catches the publishing business by surprise. There was an article I read in somebody's Substack that was great. It was about a month ago, and it talked about all the stuff that we're discussing now. And the guy who wrote it was giving these examples of books that publishers paid huge advances for. That if I would have been in the editorial seat or at the acquisitions meeting, I would have said, "There's no way, nobody's going to buy this book. This book is going to be in the remainder bin." Um, it's like when they had in the old days when it'd be straight to DVD,
Yeah.
or straight.
It's straight to DVD movie.
It's like this is like the equivalent. These books are going to go
Yes.
straight to the remainder bin. But there are people who are giving these huge advances to these books. Why? It's a whole slew of reasons, and again, that's not just one conversation. It's probably like five conversations. But
Well, and who
but
would have
get it
thought that like books like the kind of the rise in the westerns, the western themed kind of books that have been going on the last handful of years. Well, nobody would have thought that was going to kick off, but Yellowstone was a massive television
right,
show, and then
right,
all of a sudden there's a need for more. So then,
yeah,
you have all these different kind of western type of books, so the western genre just kind of explodes and gets very broad, and now it's a thing. You
and
guys got
it's yeah, and it's really interesting because I'm up in Maine right now, and in the town I used to live in. Well, actually, throughout there used to be a chain of bookstores here in Maine called Mr. Paperbacks, and I think they were throughout Maine and New Hampshire. There were about 15 stores. They were great bookstores, and the town I lived in had a Mr. Paperbacks just a short walk from my house, and so I was there all the time. I knew the staff and hung out, and it really catered to the main readership. So there were a lot of there were westerns for men, and there were romances for women, and the local distributors knew what would sell in a particular area. So you just have racks full of what was selling in that particular town or
hmm
that particular section of Maine. And then at some point in the early 2000s, as uh, uh, the sales of mass market paperbacks began to decline for different reasons, the powers that be made this determination that, well, the B list books, as they called them, which were all the genre books, are, they're not really our bread and butter anymore. We're going for the big hardcovers, hard soft releases, and paperback originals were just determined to be a thing of the past. So what happened? The westerns were all canceled. All the westerns ceased to be. You couldn't find a western novel. So it was, but it wasn't as though there was no market. It was that somebody in a sales meeting, or some multiple parties in multiple sales meetings, sort of got together until there was this gestalt in publishing saying, well, these books don't make us X amount of money. These books aren't selling anymore. So they were trying to not almost, they were trying to determine the market
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to reading the market, which is what any good business really should do. And that, unfortunately, is what happens a lot. So, like what you're saying is, yeah, now all of a sudden, they get caught by surprise when you get a series like Yellowstone,
Yeah.
and and it's just kind of it's the reverse of how business should be done, but um, that's kind of like what publishing is.
Yeah, and then you have series like Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan, and Jack Ryan Jr. series. His co-created Netforce series that you work in. You have those things that have kind of stood the test of time. Vince Flynn series. I think people still very much like series, but I think you do have to kind of look at the business and getting. I think getting into it now is even harder than it ever has been before. And just from talking to a lot of people in the industry, the rules change often. So just when you think you've got it figured out, and the one of the biggest things that people goof up on, I was told, and it's great advice. So for those who are listening, you try to write like somebody who's already been established, and you say, I like to write like Mark Greaney. Well, you can't do that. Mark Greaney is Mark Greaney for a reason. He gets away with something that you can't get away with. You can't write like Mark Greaney and get into the business, because Mark does things his way, and he's established. He's on his like 14th or 15th book in the Gray Men series alone. He does things that people can't do. You do things that people today cannot do, but you're established. So find your voice and find your style, but pay attention to what's going on in your genre and the books that are being published. How are those formatted? Look at the transition from chapter to chapter. Look at chapter length. Look at audience retention. Ask yourself what made me turn that page, because that's a big deal with today's society and today's audiences. Because again, I pick up a Mark Greaney book because it's Mark Greaney. I could care less what he wrote in there. It's Mark Greaney. I'm buying his book because it's
Yeah,
him.
it,
So
it, it whether it doesn't really matter whether you're again, because I was talking about music. I don't care if you're a writer, you're a musician, whatever creative business, and the key word there being business you're in. It's that you do have to understand that there is a business aspect to it, and I mean, we all want to be able to pay our bills and keep roofs over our heads.
yes,
So um, we want to support our families, and beyond making money off what we're doing, we are writing so people can read them. It's not like great if you're the only person who's reading your work. So you want to find your niche, and you want to find an audience. And I think that in order to do all of those things, you need to be aware of all the stuff that you were just talking about, and at the same time balance that with writing, being who you are, and writing what it is you really want to write. I had a brief and interesting online discussion with David Morrell, who
mm,
created Rambo, and he we were actually talking about some of the market trends. This was a few months ago, and he basically said, um, pretty much what you and I were just saying, which is don't chase the trends. And he said, in his case, he said, I'm just ducking my head and laying low until like certain current trends pass, and then I'll be here. And I think that what he's saying is he's going to keep writing what it is he writes.
hmm
What he writes is what what made David Morrell, and not try to change what you do based on what may be selling or what you read and like. I mean, one little thing that I do, and I think a lot, you can tell me if you do it, but when I'm working on something, I try to read something that's completely different from it. I don't want to be reading something that's in the same genre as what, or even it has any similarities to what I'm writing at that time. Like if I'm writing a Net Force book, I'm probably reading a book like some dinosaur book, History of the Dinosaurs or something. I really don't want to be. I don't want to be. And that was something Stephen King once said: is that you don't want to unconsciously pick up um, the style or the cadences of the person you're reading. So I very deliberately stay away from it. And um, between books, that's usually when I'll read my thrillers and stuff like that. But I try to read books that are really different than what I'm writing, unless I'm of course reading them for research, which is a whole different thing.
Yeah,
Is that
I think
something that
that's
you?
I do to a degree. I think it's kind of like in the mood that I'm in. Like when I'm doing like prepping for interviews like this, I make myself read whatever I get from the author. If I get something from them, or if I have something from them, and I peel it back open and I'm thumbing through it just to kind of get refreshed. Um, but yeah, I noticed that too, and I kind of quit doing it when I was really deep into writing and trying to find my voice in fiction. I stopped reading fiction because I found myself saying, "Oh, I should write it like that. Oh, I should write it
Yeah,
like that." And I desperately wanted, really, really bad, to write like Brad Thor. I wanted fast, short chapters. I wanted the pace to be blistering. I wanted to be able to go 275 pages deep into a Brad Thor book and go, I can't believe I'm this far in. It's only been a couple hours. Like I wanted that really bad, but that wasn't me. I don't think that was authentically me. So it took some time of kind of studying other people and how they wrote and kind of applying little things and finding who I was. But once I found that, I was like, okay, I can't really read fiction and write it at the same time because it was kind of conflicting for me. I think some other people can do that, but no, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I need to have
yeah,
my focus into one genre if I'm being creative.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's kind of difficult.
yeah.
Before I let you go, let's quickly talk about the Net Force series. You said it's on hold right now, but I'm assuming it's just a hold. There's going to be another one in the future. Do you have any ideas of where that might go yet?
Yes. Um,
Spoiler free,
it,
obviously. You can't tell us tons, but
the first four books in the series really were always in my mind the first arc of at least three arcs. And I think you and I were talking about this last time I was on the show, but I was really setting up some storylines that involved AI, which now, I mean, by the time I get to writing the next book, there may be 80,000 AI related novels, but so I may have to revise all that. But I was heading in a particular direction. And in fact, I will say this, if one were to carefully read any of the books, but most particularly the most recent one, which is called Moving Target, you can kind of see where I'm heading because I was really setting up the next story arc. So yeah, I do have a very good idea,
good, good. I'm looking
and there
forward
is
to it.
potential for and there's potential for Netforce moving into other media, but I can't really address that because it's all beyond my control. All I can do is wish upon a star.
Yeah. So if people want to follow along and make sure that they follow along with you and get ready for these new releases of these new books and the next Net Force, where can they go to find more about you?
I'm on I was going to say Twitter, whatever it's called now, X.
Mm-hmm.
Jerome Author. I'm on Facebook. And of course, Amazon. You can just check out my author's page on Amazon, and uh, follow your podcast.
There you go. Yeah, because we will
keep
have you
keep their
back.
eyes tuned to your podcast
Yes.
because I will let you know.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have you back when the next project comes out, and of course when NetForce, you get one of those out again, we'll do it again, and it's always a pleasure. And thanks again for carving out some time.
Thank you. It was great to see you.